This video is actually based on a special request from one of us on this channel over the remarks, very controversial remarks, by renowned political analyst, Professor Mutahi Ngunyi. According to the professor, Ruto's biggest problem stems from the Ichaweri oaths of 1969. That is the biggest problem that Ruto faces today, according to the professor. And he argues that the fuel driving the Gen Z revolution in Kenya, which is giving Ruto sleepless nights, is nothing more than the Ichaweri oaths, of course, which were engineered by the founding father of the nation, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. So, is it true? Because many people had said the Gen Z revolution of 2024, which saw the youngsters storm parliament, that one was over. Many people had argued like that. And indeed, many Kenyans agreed with them and were very sad, and they were saying in their hearts they can never repeat anything like that. And they were saying, we will never see the Gen Zs again in large numbers on the streets. It is over. Ruto will continue ruling. And in 2027, and he'll be back in power. And there's nothing Kenyans can do about it. That was the reasoning of many. But then, as we saw, on the 17th of last month, and indeed on the 25th, the anniversary of the first storming of Parliament in 2024, the Gen Zs were out in full strength. And it became very clear that the Gen Z revolution, actually I like to call it, the Gen Z-led third and final liberation of the country called Kenya, is still very much alive. And many Kenyans were very pleased. And so, what is the fuel that keeps the Gen Z fire burning? Hata na marisasi, even with a brutal police force, they don't seem to be frightened of anything. Now, of course, in this kind of scenario, it is indeed very easy to rush to conclusions and agree with the good professor that actually this thing is being driven by the oaths of Ichaweri of 1969. That is the spirit behind the Gen Zs. And indeed, we have seen a lot of prominent Gen Zs hail from the Mount Kenya region. And so what is your opinion, Chris? Actually, no. The Gen Z-led third and final liberation of the country called Kenya has nothing to do with the Ichaweri oaths of 1969. Let us go a little deeper so that we understand why. I believe we have to start by understanding what kind of analyst Professor Mutahi Ngunyi is. Because there are still very many Kenyans who believe that Mutahi Ngunyi is a political analyst, just like any other. Actually, that is not true. It is important to understand that he is much more a political fixer than a political analyst. I am sure we all remember the tyranny of numbers, which he presented to Kenyans, and it was very convincing. The long and short of it is that it is near impossible to defeat a presidential candidate from the Mount Kenya region. That's the long and short of it. And in retrospect, we can see exactly what he was doing. He was preparing the country for a Uhuru Kenyatta win in the presidency, which would not provoke any doubts from any quarters because of the tyranny of numbers. Well, the latest, in fact, information coming in from the IEBC is that we have actually, wait for this one, 2 million ghost voters. In other words, somebody has 2 million voters on the table, and in any election they can be able to give those 2 million fictitious, non-existent ghost voters to one candidate, so that that candidate starts with 2 million votes. before anybody has cast a single vote. That is really what it means. And we are told by the IEBC that most of these ghost voters are from, you guessed it, the Mount Kenya region. I believe that is the most compelling piece of information to prove that the tyranny of numbers, the so-called tyranny of numbers, is a fallacy. It's fiction. In other words, the tyranny of numbers theory has failed to stand the test of time. Simply put, that is really what it is. I mean, just look at recent population patterns across the country. Yeah, people in the Mount Kenya region over the last couple of decades have not been having many children. Their families are small. In comparison, for instance, to Western Kenya, where if you call a small family meeting, you may need Nyayo Stadium. No kidding. Anyway, Professor Mutahi Ngunyi is obviously very good at what he does, political fixer. And therefore this latest piece of information, very controversial, that he has released, needs to be looked at through the same lens. Obviously, one huge advantage he has is that he has a lot of knowledge on the history, on the politics of the country called Kenya. And therefore it is very easy for him to fix any political problem for any candidate. And in this instance, I am guessing that the client could be President William Samoei Ruto. Why are the Ichaweri oaths of 1969 not linked to the Gen Z uprising? Well, for starters, we know that the Gen Z movement is not tribal. It is countrywide, and it cuts across all the tribes within the nation called Kenya. Please don't believe government bloggers who in recent times have been feeding us with all kinds of rubbish, especially on social media. You know, I really sympathize with those who ignore the spiritual, because it is impossible to understand my beloved brothers and sisters from the Mount Kenya region, if you don't understand the damage the Ichaweri oaths have done to this community. In my opinion, the oaths have been most damaging to Mount Kenya region by far more than to any other region. Even Luo Nyanza has to come second. Let me explain. The oath stated very clearly that the presidency was not supposed to cross a certain river out of Kiambu Kikuyus, into Nyeri or even into Murang'a. It was supposed to be domiciled forever and ever, according to this oath, within Kiambu. Okay? Now here is something that is super fascinating. And if you understand it, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. Okay? In 2002, the presidency actually crossed over to Nyeri. And Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki, who is from the Kikuyu community, but not from Kiambu, was sworn in as President of the Republic of Kenya. Now, spiritually already, Kibaki went through some dire consequences, which some people link to the same oath before he became president. You remember he was involved in a near-fatal accident at the Machakos junction of the Nairobi-Mombasa Road. In fact, he was sworn in while on a wheelchair. You know, hata kama tumesoma sana, an oath is a very serious thing. Because the consequences of the presidency crossing over in an election, Moi was not elected. He just inherited the presidency. And yes, he's not from Kiambu. He hailed from the Kalenjin community. But when the presidency crossed over in an election where people had participated, including the ancestors of those who had taken the oath, very binding, there were very serious consequences. What happened in 2007? Do you remember? 2007, 2008. We had clashes. Which community suffered the most damage in those clashes? The house of Mumbi bore the brunt of the clashes by far. Okay? A north is not a good thing. And yet, the entire community is suffering because of the actions of how many people? One man. Because it is Jomo Kenyatta who insisted, pushed forward the idea of introducing the oaths so as to solidify his presidency. It is my opinion that one day Kenyans must come together and break this evil oath. Put a stop to it. Anyway, I'm sure you can all see my point here. Okay? Because the professor was saying that Ruto's problem are the Ichaweri oaths, which are driving the Mount Kenya region to attempt to remove him from power via the Gen Z uprising. And my point is that the people who are suffering most as a result of this oath cannot be the same people who are going to use the power of the oath to remove somebody from power. No, that can't be right. And so we come to the big question, the elephant in the room. What exactly is driving the Gen Z uprising? What exactly is it? What mysterious, powerful force is this, driving the Gen Zs so that the Ruto regime, very powerful people even within and outside Kenya, cannot find any answer, any way to stop the Gen Z revolution? And they have tried many things. Bunduki, marisasi, everything. It has not worked. So what is this power? What exactly is the driving force behind the Gen Z spirit? Now, I don't want to go very deep spiritually, but let me just mention very quickly that the season we have entered right now, the season of exposure, is also a season where the power of darkness, their strength has been reduced. In other words, it is a season where light is being mlickered, shone on dark places. Okay? And of course, dark powers include mauchawi, witchcraft, and all those dark evil things that keep a north alive. And indeed, this is one of the reasons why so many things are being exposed. Instructively, things which were previously in the dark. I'm sure some of you are getting me. And please don't misquote me. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that some oaths have been destroyed. No. I am just saying their usual power is reduced. Now this is very relevant to what we're discussing here, because it is the exposure that has triggered a lot of anger amongst the Gen Z. Yeah, actually made a lot of them give up hope on their future. And of course, a people without hope are very dangerous people. Bila kizungu mingi, it is the light which is shining on places which were previously dark, rather than the powers of darkness that are driving the Gen Z revolution. I hope I'm clear on that. And of course, it is also true that there are many other factors, very important factors, that have helped to drive this unstoppable Gen Z uprising. Yeah, of course, one of them is social media and the internet. The world has become a village. The young people of Kenya are able to see the quality of life of other young people in other countries, which have better leaders, which have better systems, which have more accountable governments. They see this every day on social media. Of course, that has an impact. Actually, Ruto and company hawana bahati. This was the very wrong time in history for somebody to come into power and rule a country the way the Kenya Kwanza government has tried to rule the country. Somebody should have just told them from the get-go that route is impossible. It is impossible to succeed ruling a country like Kenya that way. You see, you cannot keep on fooling people all the time. There is that famous quote, you can fool some of the people all the time, and you can fool others some of the time. But there is no way you can fool all the people all the time. It is not possible. And as we have seen, even with the very latest incident yesterday, where somebody who had disappeared suddenly reappeared with his head shaved, and then we were told he was in hiding, where apparently he shaved his hair. Even that one is an example of people who are making decisions, thinking in their minds that it is very easy to fool Kenyans. I have news for them. Kenyans are very intelligent people. They are not easy people to fool. They are not. And I believe this is one of the core problems we have in Kenya. Because even government bloggers are very busy trying to sell things which intelligent Kenyans can never ever buy. And indeed they have failed. One of the things they've been trying to do is to return our politics back to tribalism. Oh, it's Mount Kenya is the problem. Oh, Kikuyus are the problem. That has failed to work. Very few Kenyans are buying that one because they can see through it. Poleni sana. This was the very, very wrong time to try and do what you have been trying to do and what you are still stubbornly insisting on doing. It won't work. Anyway, in my opinion, the Gen Z uprising has only just started and it is unstoppable. If I was a member of the political class, do you know what I'd do? I would stop what I'm doing immediately. I would change immediately and be on the side of the long-suffering majority people of Kenya, the Wananchi. I would do that for my own sake and for the sake of my children. But then of course I know, hiyo ni kama kuchezea mbuzi guitar, because these people are enjoying power. They are wallowing in public funds. Nobody is thinking of tomorrow. Nobody is thinking of what will happen after the Gen Z succeed. Nobody is thinking about that. Hey, in many ways, I really pity them. In conclusion, I hope I have fully addressed that question which one of us had over the remarks of the good professor about the link of Ichaweri 1969 to what is currently happening in the country. Very quickly before I go, we're in the last 12 hours of doing what? Of ensuring that we do not leave people hanging. You remember I told you what happened with that sensitive video. Vile ilipigwa, the way it was sabotaged. Clearly somebody does not want anybody to have that information, or as few people as possible to have that information, because we gave a chance to anybody who wants to see for themselves what the issue may have been. What is this information they did not want Kenyans to have? We're in the last 12 hours. You can see details on your screens right now. I will not say very much today about what happened. I'm still recovering. But you can check my previous video, my immediate previous video, where I tell the whole story of what unfolded. Yeah, but for now, you can use the details on your screens right now to get just that sensitive video. You will not get any of the other previously produced special reports, only this controversial one, ambayo imepigwa kupigwa. Okay? Only 999 Kenya shillings or $8. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.